Hi everyone, my name is Valentina and I'm here with Aileen and Bella. Aileen is a junior and Bella is a sophomore at UMass Amherst. Aileen, would you like to introduce yourself a little more?
Sure. Hi, I'm Aileen. I'm a junior, as Valentina just said, and I am a poli-sci and education major, and I plan on going to law school post-grad.
And Bella, what about you? Do you want to introduce yourself a little more?
Yeah. I'm a sophomore, as you had said also previously. I'm a biology major and I'm like on the pre-PA track, so I'm gonna go to PA school hopefully after I graduate.
Cool. Great. So I'm so excited to have you both here today. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this a little bit. Um, So to preface, Bella, Aileen, and I all went to private schools in the Boston area for high school. So today we will be talking about a little bit about what the experience was like in general and focus more on what it was like for us as Latinas in a PWI for high school. So I'd love to just start off with hearing about your personal experience. Where did you go? Did you like it? What was something that you didn't like? What was just your overall experience there? Who wants
Um,
to start? Yeah,
I
begin.
can go first. So I went to Thayer Academy in Braintree, Mass. I went there for like 7 years. I started in sixth grade and then I like went to the high school after I graduated the middle school. Um, my experience there was really interesting just because I did like start so young and I feel like I didn't like grow into who I was until like the later years. Um, but overall, my experience it had its like ups and downs. Like it was good, but there's also like parts that you reflect on like after you graduate and even like while it's happening where you just like realize that things could like definitely have been done differently if that makes sense. But yeah.
So I went to Noble and Greeno School, which is in Dedham, Massachusetts, and I began attending there in ninth grade. And prior to that, I had attended a majority POC school for K through 8. It was a charter school. Um, And I am very grateful for having attended Nobles. I definitely got so many more opportunities because I went to a school like that and because of just the amount of opportunities they had there. But it was very much a love-hate relationship where I really enjoyed all the opportunities that I got from being at the school, but I didn't enjoy the social aspect as much or the class options. Like one thing that I still to this day am upset about is the fact that they didn't have a Spanish for native speakers class. So when I tried to take Spanish, I ended up getting removed from the program entirely because I could speak Spanish despite the fact that I couldn't read or write.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I went to BB&N, which was in Cambridge, and I started going there, in seventh grade, and then graduated from there. And I'd say like I would say I had like a similar experience to both of you in like different in both ways that you're sharing. Like I personally really like BB&N, and if like I could go back in time, I would do it again and I'd go there again because I feel like I got so many opportunities. I was able to do so many things that I wouldn't have necessarily been able to do in like public schools, like whether it was like just clubs, like being able to start whatever I wanted, like so like spark whatever sparked my interest basically, or like try different sports, like things that I wouldn't have necessarily been able to do. But for Spanish, like I was never allowed to take Spanish, so I took French. And like to be honest, like that's good for me because I can read and write, and so I learned how to speak a different language, so I do appreciate that aspect. But it was just interesting because I would have liked to better my skills, but I wasn't able to because they wouldn't let me. And then I did like at times experience like some racism, which was not great, especially in middle school, for my like development and like my love for my culture. Um, but yeah, so that was actually my next question. Like, were there um any like moments that you like can think of, or like specific moments that you experienced like a racist comment directed to you, or that you witnessed it being directed to your friend or anything?
I can go again. Um, there was actually like a few like things that like I can honestly think of. Most of them were from like my like freshman year or like like middle school too. Just because I feel like people like aren't as aware of like what they're saying, like usually like in middle school and stuff like that. But I remember like I cut my hair like really short. I think like my freshman or sophomore year or something like that. And so then everybody in my grade started calling me Dora. Like literally for like the rest of high school, I'm not even lying, till my hair grew back. Or like two, like I remember like I would like always be like late in the morning just because like I would take forever getting ready. And like one time like a girl was like, "Oh, like are you late because like you had to like hop over the border to like get here this morning?" And I'm like, no, like what the heck? And just like I know my sister, like she went to Thayer also like before me and like she had like experienced like some crazy things because she graduated like in 2015, so it was like even like earlier than I went. And like hers was like on like the daily. It was like insane. But yeah.
There were a lot of moments at Nobles while I was there. I mean, it wasn't very often that it was directed towards me, but a lot of times it was people who I knew because it was a very small school. Like before I got there, one of my friends who attended Nobles for middle school, um, she was called a monkey on the bus by one of her white peers. The same year before I got there, there was a guy, he was a senior when I arrived as a freshman. Um, he had been called the N-word with a hard ER by another student, which resulted in a fight. There was a lot of different things, like a lot of things that happened over social media and text messages, like I remember one girl who got suspended because she had uploaded a video to her Snapchat over winter break and she was rapping along to a song and like yelling out the N-word as she did it. Um, like just like things like that. But then like on like the more personal ones, it was like I remember getting there freshman year, like one of the first things that was said about me was that I was ghetto, like me and my friend group, because we were laughing and I guess we were being too loud. So kids just decided to go around and start saying we were ghetto. Um, there was it honestly happened more with teachers than it did with students. Had teachers who consistently called me by the wrong name. Consistently. It did not matter if the only other like POC girl who was taking the class was not in that same classroom. We were consistently called by the wrong names, and it was across like multiple teachers and multiple grades. So just things like that, but it was rarely ever overt or like specifically violent. It was mostly just words, and they did it behind our backs.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. I think middle school was the worst by far. Like in high school it kind of died down a little bit. Of course, there was always like little things like microaggressions and stuff like that. But in middle school, I had someone write on a whiteboard. Like I was sitting next to them during a test, and this person wrote on a whiteboard, "Oh, like your family is taking my family's jobs. Go back over the border," and that kind of thing. And I reacted and I got yelled at, which was obviously like my teacher didn't know what was going on, but it was just like I reacted and I was the one that got in trouble. And this person when I never said anything, but one of my friends reported it and this person never got in trouble. And I also was called Dora at one point too. So like I don't know, I do relate to you in that situation.
I
Um
was also called Dora, but not at my private school, at my middle and elementary school, because I got a Karen bomb when I donated my hair. So I got called Dora for like 2 years.
um yeah, I think it's part of being Latina, which is not a good necessarily a good thing, but I feel like a lot of people like go through that experience. Um, but so you were talking about like classes, Aileen, and so I'm just curious, like, did you see a lot of like representation of like Latin culture in class, whether it was like reading like books or something like that, um, or like any other cultures? Like, was that something that um type of reading or literature that you read in classes?
No, none. Um, I would say like the only time where we explored, I also wasn't there for the entirety of the school year. I know that for my senior year, the history that we were supposed to take is AP European history, and I dropped that halfway through the year. And then for my junior year, I ended up going abroad for spring. So again, I did not take a complete year. So realistically, I only had 2 complete years of English, and 2 complete years of history and so on and so forth. So I also just had like a very narrow, um, I didn't really experience it as much as my other friends did. I know freshman year we did history of human communities, which we definitely did explore a lot more different cultures rather than just the westernized ones. Like I know like we did like study the Ottoman Empire and like India and like a lot of places in the Middle East and Africa, but it was just a very limited class because we were studying like 30 different countries over the period of 2 semesters. And then we did US history, which was strictly in the United States. And then we had AP European history, which again, I dropped and I did not like. And it didn't really matter what class, like math, obviously, it was never included. When it came to history or English, we mostly just focus on the United States, and there may have been diversity within that, like focusing on Black authors or focusing on the civil rights movement. But it was always the very US centered.
What about you, Bella?
Yeah, my school is like the same. Honestly, I can't really remember like that well, like the history or like English class, like literature classes I took, but I just remember like learning a lot about like US history. It's kind of like the basic stuff that you learn, like Civil War, stuff like that. And then the other classes I took were European history, but I don't remember like ever going beyond that, to be honest with you. Just those two.
Okay. Um, okay, so now I wanted from like one conversation that we had in the past, like I found out that you both of you started a club for Latinos at your individual schools. So I'm just curious, like what sparked your interest in doing that? Like how did you go about that process? Was it easy? Like what was the one moment that made you want to do that?
Well, for me, I it wasn't very, very difficult, but that's because it's something that had been in talks for years before I even got there. And so we already had an affinity space, but it wasn't at all divided. We had sister to sister and brother to brother, which was just like every single student of color. Were divided into that. And then when the Black Lives Matter movement started, the push for smaller affinity groups grew and grew and grew. Um, so we ended up with PWIs, which was the Latinx affinity group, and there was the Black Student Union, the BSU, there was a mixed student union, and we just ended up with a whole lot of different smaller affinity spaces that would meet more often, whereas the bigger ones would meet less often. So while like we helped plan it, we also had a lot of support from the head of the DEI office, Mr. De Leon, and there had been support from previous year students and specifically Jeremy, I know because he was like the senior most person in Poder. He was particularly like the person that like started the letters and talking to Mr. De Leon and everything about it, and the rest of us came on and helped him once it was more formed. But to my knowledge, they like really started pushing for it with Black Lives Matter, and by the end of the year, we had small affinity groups.
Was it similar for you, Bella?
Like the process of getting it, well, I can tell you like when like I like thought of the idea first is like when I think it was like my junior or sophomore year, the school, like the head of our school had asked like me and my friend Mia to give the Hispanic Heritage Month presentation just because like at this point of like our high school careers, we had been like pretty vocal about like our culture just like through like overall like diversity groups that had already been on campus. So they asked if we could give the presentation. And then after we gave it the first time, like we had like a lot of students like come up to us after like just like thanking us like for the presentation just because it was like I think it was like one of the first times it had happened like at there like I don't think that there was a Hispanic Heritage Month presentation before that or just like celebration period. And so like then we got to thinking like this would be something that we'd like be interested in like starting like a club for, just because we had Omega, which was like just a diversity club like in general, but we just like also noticed that like we had like affinity groups that like we would meet with, and it was just like it just like felt like there was a necessity for like a space like that on campus. The process of getting it started like wasn't that hard, just because kind of like Eileen said, it was like in the talk, it was in talk like already, like before we had like brought up the idea. I think we just like had to get like a faculty to like advocate for us. Um, and our head of school at the time was like really passionate about starting it with us also, so it was pretty easy to get started. And then from there we started like we meeting weekly, and then it just like grew.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think my experience was more similar to Aileen's because I was part of this club called Shades, which was like for all the students. And honestly, like being a part of it, like I really enjoyed it and I had been a part of it since freshman year. But I like the majority of students that went were Black students, and that was fine. I loved connecting with them, but I was the only one that was not Black that would go because no one else felt comfortable going because for some reason like people assumed that it was like a BSU, which it wasn't. It was for everyone. Um so, and then there was like someone made a comment about me being there because people like even part of the club, even though it was known that it wasn't just for Black students, like people that were a part of the club were not okay with me being there, which was, so I was like, you know what? I'm gonna start my own club, my own affinity space. And it was really cool because immediately like there were 16 Hispanic students that like I found out didn't feel comfortable going to this like club called Shades for because I don't know, it would just they just didn't feel comfortable going to it for whatever reason. So it was really cool to like find out that people wanted a space like this. It's just they wanted their own space to be able to talk about their own culture and then be able to like share that with the rest of the community. So I think that was how that started for me. So, sorry, moving on because we're running a little bit out of time. But my last question is, I know in 2020 when George Floyd had recently died, many Instagram accounts were created by students at these various schools. Um and they were created for students that are in marginalized communities to share their experiences at their schools. I actually found the Instagrams from Nobles and Thayer and then also BB&Ns. So I don't know if you ever heard of Black at Nobles and then Black at Thayer and then at BB&N it was Masks at BB&N and people could post anonymously like their experiences like going through racism at these schools and like specific moments that they experience like homophobia or something like that. Um and I actually read an article about Nobles, and a spokesperson from Nobles said that the school was very welcoming to these stories that were being shared and that they were open to hearing like students' opinions. So this is eventually going to be for both of you, but Aileen, was this true? Like, were they actually open to it? Like, what was the reaction?
One thing about Nobles is that as much issues that students of colors had with other students or with specific teachers, it was not an institutional issue. Like it was never a problem to get a meeting with with the dean of students. Like it was never an issue if we wanted to do something. Like they were always open to hearing our ideas, and it's very prevalent like through my experience there, through the fact that even since we've left, like the percent of students of color in each grade has steadily increased.
Mhm.
It went from it being that across the four grades there could be one like friend group that was just consist like all students of color, like there was like 30 of us, to there being enough students of color in each grade to constitute the entirety of my friend group from freshman to senior year. Um, so like there were like definitely moments where as students of color, like we were like upset. Like I know during Black Lives Matter movement, we all organized to wear Black Lives Matter like masks. Like this was like not post COVID, but during COVID, we were all wearing these masks, and we ended up getting told to take them off because they were political. And we had a whole meeting about it, and um, I somewhat understand why we couldn't wear them because it was essentially like because Black Lives Matter is considered political, if they allow us to wear that, they also have to allow other political messages like MAGA if they allow us to wear that. So I kind of understood, but it was like everything was a conversation and we were brought into that conversation. That's why we got the small affinity spaces when we asked for it. That's why we got a diversity, equity, and inclusion board of students that directly interacted with the Office of diversity and inclusion. Like they were always very receptive and they were quick to act. Like I mentioned earlier, how the year before I got there was a kid that got called the N-word with the hard ER, and he got into a fight with the other kid. That guy was the one that threw the first punch. And the POC student was the one that technically started the fight. That POC student did not get in trouble. The student that got in trouble was the white student that called him a slur. There were multiple times where students were suspended, expelled, asked to leave the school over racial incidents. So it was never like obviously every like racism is institutional issue, but it was not as prevalent in a school like Noble. So it's kind of a wild thing to like say like that this PWI like like it wasn't really their fault that it was like this, but a lot of the issues were individuals. Like I know a lot of the people who posted on Black at Nobles. I don't know if it's still an active account, but last I checked, I remember almost every single story that was posted. I know who posted it, and I can tell you right now that a lot of those stories are about the same like 15 to 20 individuals.
Okay. Bella, what about you? What was Black at Thayer a big deal? How did
Um,
you react?
yeah, I remember like when it like came out and stuff like that. Um, it was like it was definitely a huge issue at Fair, like especially because like Fair was like really big at like especially at this time, like when it came out on like cracking down like social media, like period, like anything that like was involved with the school, even other than this account, just like in general, if you were like using Fair's name or like for example, if you like you were like wearing a jersey and like you posted a TikTok or something like that, like immediately they like needed to know like who it was and like just like really crack down on the issues. And now that like Thayer was like being like put like kind of like in the spotlight and like in a negative light because there was a lot of instances that were like brought up on this account. They were like really trying to figure out like who was behind it. And like honestly, I'm pretty sure like they were planning on like expelling or suspending the student that started the account. Like they were like actively like searching for them. I remember being in high school, like talking about nobles and like everybody like in my grade at least the POC students thought really highly like of nobles and like the way that they dealt with things because it was like just so opposite from like how Thayer dealt with things. I feel like with Thayer they never really liked to work with the students directly. Instead of like like a lot of what they planned and like dealt with things was like mainly with the parents. And the issue with this is like the parents that they dealt with were like the parents on uh like the committee of parents. I forget what it's called. I think it's called like TAPA or something like that. And obviously like all of the parents who are like on this board are all white because it's like most POC like parents like at the school like worked so they didn't have time to be a part of like this like board. And like the opinion of these parents was like to just like shut down like the account and that like to suspend the student who was behind it and not like actively do anything to better the school and more just like kind of just like silence everybody. So I don't remember like what exactly like happened from there. I don't know if the account got shut down. I just remember it was just like this huge deal. And then they were like even like threats that like if you sent in things to like the account, like you could also get in trouble for that. So it was just overall just like really, really messy. But I remember like when the account came out though, like for me and for like other people, it was kind of just like it kind of felt like a safe space because even though like these issues were happening to everybody, like it was there like was not like a safe space to like talk about it publicly, especially if it was about like faculty members, because there was like a lot of stuff that happened with faculty members and just like seeing like people's stories with like same faculty members that like you had an experience with was like kind of like not like nice in a way, but it's also it's like you're like not alone, you know?
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all the time we have, but I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I found it really interesting to hear the other your perspectives and how it's very similar, but there's like some differences. So I really thank you guys. And yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.